Hollywood woke to silence on October 11th, 2025. The kind of silence that follows a shock so deep it takes a moment to believe it's real. Diane Keaton, the woman who taught generations that being different could be dazzling, was gone at 79. The news confirmed by her family spread faster than most could process. Pneumonia, they said. Swift, merciless, unexpected. Even those closest to her hadn't realized how serious it had become. For decades, Keaton had embodied resilience. She had outcharmed heartbreak, outlaughed anxiety, outworked everyone. And yet, in the end, her passing came quietly, privately, without warning. Like one of her whispered monologues that left audiences teary-eyed before they even knew why. Her home in Brentwood, usually glowing with laughter and the hum of piano music, had fallen still in those final days. Family members later revealed that Diane had spent her last week surrounded by warmth, though her circle was small. A sister by her side, her two adopted children, Dexter and Duke, checking in daily. The actress who had once commanded every red carpet in Hollywood now found peace in simple things. Morning light through the window, a dog asleep at her feet, her daughter reading aloud from an old journal. Her spokesperson released the statement the world dreaded. Diane Keaton passed away peacefully from pneumonia on October 11th. Her decline was sudden, unexpected, especially for someone with such vitality and spirit. The message was brief, unadorned, just the way she would have wanted. No spectacle, no spotlight. But for Al Pacino, the news landed like a blow. The man who once shared her screen and her heart was filming in Paris when the call came. He later admitted, "When I heard the news, I was shaken. I thought about her smile, her laugh, the way she'd walk into a room and make everything feel alive. Those memories, frozen in celluloid since 1972's The Godfather, had suddenly become haunting fragments of a past that could never return." Diane's family held a small private funeral a few days later. No press, no cameras, no industry guests. Only the quiet sound of wind through the trees and the soft voices of those who knew her best. Her children laid white roses beside her portrait and read lines from her favorite film, Annie Hall. "Love is too weak a word for what I feel. I love you." It was a small act of humor and tenderness, exactly the kind of touch that defined her. Outside the church, fans left flowers, sketches, and handwritten notes tucked inside her signature wide-brimmed hats. Someone had written on a sign, "You made awkward beautiful." The message went viral overnight, because that was the truth of Diane Keaton. She had made awkward beautiful and flawed utterly human. Her family's statement to fans was gentle. Diane lived with gratitude for every day. She loved her work, her friends, her children, and this world's beauty. She would want people to celebrate that by showing kindness to each other. They suggested donations to animal shelters or homeless charities, her lifelong causes, instead of flowers. Even in death, she was quietly giving. Yet beyond the public tributes and grieving tweets was a deeper story, one of love, regret, and the kind of bond that fame can neither create nor destroy. Because long before Diane Keaton became an Oscar winner or a fashion icon, she had been Al Pacino's muse, his confidant, and perhaps the only person who ever saw beyond his armor. Their love had burned quietly in the background of some of cinema's most beloved moments, and though it ended decades ago, its echo never really faded. The two had met on the set of The Godfather in 1971, both young, hungry, and uncertain of what fame might bring. She was 27, fresh from Broadway and bursting with nervous energy. He was 31, a method actor who barely spoke between takes. Diane once joked, "I was mad for him before I even knew him." He was so mysterious, and I'm a sucker for a mystery. What started as professional chemistry soon became something more. A love that would haunt both their lives for the next 50 years. Their romance was never simple. Pacino was intense, restless, and terrified of commitment. Keaton was open-hearted, funny, and ready for forever. She later admitted, "I gave him an ultimatum. Marry me or it's over." He didn't, and so she walked away. It was the hardest decision of her life, and yet it defined her independence. Maybe it was a blessing, she said years later. But it wasn't my choice.
And what about Al Pacino? How long?
I kissed him for sure.
Okay. For sure. And
That's for sure.
How long were you with Al?
About 5 years, yeah. But the greatest loves of my life, though, were all the men in all the movies that I had to kiss.
That choice, his silence and her leaving, would linger between them for decades. They remained friends, worked together again on The Godfather Part 3, and appeared on stage together when she received the AFI Life Achievement Award in 2017. That night, Pacino stood in front of her and said softly, "You're a great artist, and I love you forever." The audience cheered. Diane blushed, and for a moment, it felt like a scene from one of their movies. But this time, there was no script. When news of her death broke, that moment played across the internet again and again. Pacino saying, "I love you forever," his eyes soft, her smile trembling at the corners. It was as if Hollywood had just realized those words weren't a tribute. They were a confession years in the making. Now, in the days after her funeral, Al Pacino would finally say what so many suspected he had been holding in his heart for half a century. It was his turn to speak, not as an actor, but as a man who had lost the love of his life. Have you ever lost someone so suddenly that it felt like the world forgot to warn you? Long before their names became legend, they were simply two hungry actors trying to make sense of the world. In 1971, on a cramped New York soundstage dressed as a turn-of-the-century Sicilian cafe, Diane Keaton met a quiet, dark-eyed man who barely spoke between takes. He kept to himself, murmuring his lines under his breath, lost in the rhythm of Michael Corleone. Keaton, all nervous energy and quick wit, thought he might be shy, or maybe arrogant. She couldn't tell. But when the cameras rolled, the silence between them cracked open and something electric passed through it. "I was mad for him," Diane would later laugh. "He was so mysterious. Charming, hilarious, a non-stop talker when he finally started talking." That first spark on the Godfather set would become the foundation for one of Hollywood's most private and enduring love stories. Away from the cameras, they were opposites drawn together by curiosity. He, the brooding craftsman obsessed with realism. She, the spontaneous dreamer who found beauty in chaos. Their conversations lasted until dawn, about film, art, fear, and the strange loneliness of fame that was just beginning to touch them both. Al cooked pasta, Diane sang Joni Mitchell songs off-key. Friends remember them walking through New York in oversized coats, laughing about everything and nothing, invisible in the city's noise. In those early years, fame was still a distant wave, and love felt like something real they could hold on to. But waves always come in. By 1974, The Godfather Part 2 made them icons. Their faces were plastered across magazines, their private lives suddenly public property. Pacino retreated into work. Keaton craved connection. "He disappeared into his characters," she once said. "I wanted him to disappear into us." The imbalance slowly pulled them apart. Diane wanted a home, a family, a promise. Al, terrified of confinement, avoided the subject. "Marriage?" he'd joke. "I can barely commit to a hairstyle." But behind the jokes was fear. The fear that loving someone meant losing control. When she finally gave him an ultimatum, "Marry me or it's over," he couldn't answer. So she did. She left. Years later, she would call it the hardest role she ever played. "Walking away from Al was like cutting off a limb," she admitted. "You survive, but you always feel it." Still, the love never completely vanished. It lingered like a scene that never wrapped, the director shouting, "Cut!" Yet the actors still staring into each other's eyes.
You know, that's
Well, that's,
yeah,
that has a special meaning.
because he's been a lover.
He once enjoyed being around me, but only on occasion. No,
Okay.
not often.
Yeah,
But he once, yeah.
being
So
around.
I say yes to Mr. Pacino.
Okay, yes, all right.
Even as their lives moved on, the echo remained. They reunited in 1990 for The Godfather Part 3. 2 decades had passed, and yet the chemistry was immediate, effortless, an invisible thread that time couldn't fray. Between takes, they teased each other, shared old jokes, even argued like an old married couple. Crew members whispered that the fire was still there, just quieter now, tempered by experience. Pacino once said, "Working with her again felt like deja vu mixed with destiny." But destiny had other plans. They wrapped the film, hugged goodbye, and once again went their separate ways. For Diane, the years that followed were full and fearless. She adopted 2 children, wrote memoirs, and continued to work, unafraid of age or eccentricity. For Al, there were more roles, more accolades, but never the same connection. Both remained unmarried, as if some part of them was still waiting for a conversation left unfinished. Then came 2017. At the AFI Life Achievement Awards ceremony, decades after their romance had faded into myth, Al Pacino stepped onto the stage to honor her. The audience rose before he even spoke. Diane sat in the front row, eyes glistening. "You're a great artist," he said, voice trembling slightly. "And I love you forever." The crowd erupted, but she only smiled, softly, knowingly, as if those 4 words were meant for her ears alone. That moment would replay endlessly after her death 8 years later. People called it prophetic, a farewell disguised as celebration. For Al, it became a memory he would cling to, the last time he told her, publicly and without irony, what he had always felt. They were never husband and wife, but theirs was a marriage of souls, 2 artists bound by admiration, humor, and an unspoken regret that neither could completely silence. In interviews, Diane would joke, "We're the only couple that broke up and still makes sense." Behind the laughter, though, there was wistfulness. And when she passed, that wistfulness became grief. For Pacino, losing Diane meant losing the living proof of his youth, his beginnings, his better self. The woman who once coaxed him to smile between takes was gone, leaving only the reel of memories looping endlessly in his mind. Do you believe that some loves are meant to stay unfinished? Beautiful because they never found their ending? The morning after Diane Keaton's funeral, a gray mist hung over Paris. Al Pacino was there finishing a small European shoot, but the city suddenly felt empty. He canceled the day's work, sat by the hotel window, and watched the rain trace crooked lines down the glass. Later, he told a reporter, "When I heard, I was shaken." It's been over 30 years since we were together, but the memories came back all at once. Beautiful and cruel. For decades, he had protected his privacy like armor, but that armor cracked open when he began to write his tribute. Alone in that room, he tried to find words equal to a woman who had defied words her whole life. He wrote slowly, in long pauses, the pen trembling between sentences. "She lived without limits," he began. "Everything she touched carried her unmistakable energy. On screen, she was lightning and laughter. Off screen, she was light, simple, pure, unpredictable." Those who knew Pacino said the statement felt more like a love letter than a eulogy. It wasn't polished press language. It was raw, unfiltered emotion. Every sentence carried years of silence. "She was my partner, my friend, someone who brought me happiness and, more than once, changed the direction of my life." The world read those lines and felt the pulse of something deeper, a confession he had never allowed himself to make. Diane had been the constant in his story, the face that appeared in every mental reel no matter how many films he made or lovers came and went. Friends revealed that Pacino had called Diane's daughter Dexter after the funeral. "Your mother," he told her softly, "was the bravest person I ever met." His voice broke. He thanked her for letting him say goodbye, even if only in words. "She made me better," he added. It was all he could manage before hanging up. In the days that followed, journalists asked for comment. Pacino released one last statement, short, poetic, devastating. "People will miss her, but more than that, they will remember her. She left a mark that cannot fade. She could fly, and in my heart, she always will." That single phrase, "she could fly," spread across social media like a collective sigh. Fans paired it with clips of Diane dancing in Annie Hall, twirling in a white suit, laughing with abandon. To many, it felt like Al Pacino's final love poem. To those who knew their history, it was an admission of regret. The sound of a man realizing he had let his miracle slip away. A close friend later confided to Vanity Fair, "Al told me once, the love of my life was Diane. I'll never forgive myself for not marrying her." He said it quietly, like a prayer. The friend paused before adding, "I think he believed there would always be time." Time, of course, had other plans. Pacino had often spoken about fear, the fear of permanence, of being known too well. But after Diane's death, that fear turned into something else: absence. At a private memorial in Los Angeles, he sat in the back row, head bowed, listening to old colleagues share stories. When it was his turn, he stood without notes. "She made awkwardness into beauty," he said. "She made honesty fashionable. She made me laugh when the world was falling apart. And if I'm honest, she made me better than I deserved to be." The room was silent. For once, Al Pacino, the man who had roared through half a century of cinema, spoke barely above a whisper. Every word felt heavy, final. Later, when someone asked what he regretted most, he smiled sadly. "That I didn't tell her sooner. That I thought love could wait." That line became the headline the next morning. Pacino, "I thought love could wait." Behind the scenes, he kept a small frame photo of them from The Godfather Part 2. Kay looking at Michael with quiet fury, Michael unable to meet her eyes. "That was us," he once said. "Always looking, never meeting." Those who visited him in the weeks after her passing said he seemed gentler, slower, as if time had humbled him. He'd walk through the garden of his Beverly Hills home, whispering lines from Shakespeare, grieving in rhythm, turning sorrow into verse. One afternoon, a neighbor overheard him say softly, "Good night, Diane." Perhaps it was a habit, or perhaps a goodbye that refused to end. In interviews that winter, he tried to deflect. "She was one of a kind," he'd say. But every now and then, the mask slipped, and he would smile the way he once did in his 30s. The smile she had coaxed out of him. Theirs was a story without a final act. Unfinished, imperfect, eternal. And in that imperfection lay its beauty. Have you ever realized too late that you let the love of your life slip away? When the news of Diane Keaton's death settled over Hollywood, it felt as if a whole color had drained from the screen. Tributes poured in from every corner of the industry. Actors, directors, designers, even young creators who had never met her but felt shaped by her presence. Yet none carried the quiet ache of Al Pacino's words. At the memorial service in Los Angeles, the theater lights were dimmed to a soft gold. A single photograph of Diane, smiling in her trademark hat, eyes mischievous, glowed above the stage. Friends read her favorite lines from Annie Hall and "Something's Gotta Give," and laughter rippled through tears. That mix of humor and heartbreak was so very her. Then came the final montage. Scenes of her walking through Central Park, clumsy and radiant. Her voiceover whispering, "Love is the only real adventure." The audience stood in silence. Pacino remained seated, his head lowered, hands clasped, as if still listening for her next line. Afterward, he stepped outside into the cool California evening. Reporters waited, but he said nothing. A friend later told people that he simply looked up at the sky and whispered, "She could fly." And then he left alone into the night. The days that followed became a mosaic of remembrance. Francis Ford Coppola released a statement calling her the soul of the Godfather, our heartbeat behind the camera. Meryl Streep wrote, "Diane taught every woman that you can be brilliant and bizarre, and that's exactly how you shine." Younger stars like Emma Stone and Anne Hathaway thanked her for making imperfection the new perfection. Social media filled with black and white photos. The turtlenecks, the wide brim hats, the crooked grin that looked both curious and wise. Hashtags like #ThankYouDiane and #SheCouldFly trended for days. Fans recreated her iconic Annie Hall outfits. saying she made being yourself fashionable again. But behind the public celebration lay something more intimate, a reflection on what she'd given to the people who actually knew her. Diane's daughter Dexter posted a short message. "Mom taught us that kindness is style." Her son Duke added, "She lived to make others laugh. Even on her last day, she told me not to forget to dance." Those words echoed through the industry, reminding everyone that beneath the fame, Diane Keaton was defined by joy, the kind that didn't need applause. Diane Keaton's filmography reads like a map of Hollywood's evolution. From the fragile hope of Kay Adams to the fearless wit of Annie Hall, from the melancholy of Reds to the late career warmth of Something's Gotta Give, she embodied the complexity of womanhood in every era. She made audiences laugh at their neuroses and cry at their own truths. She also reshaped fashion, turning menswear into armor for independence. Designers still cite her as the reason a suit can feel romantic. But the influence that mattered most to her wasn't in couture or cinema. It was in the courage she gave others to live honestly. She once said, "If you're not a little afraid every day, you're not growing." That philosophy guided her until the end. She directed films, published photography books, restored historic homes, and raised 2 children on her own. Even her solitude was chosen, not endured. "I never needed a husband," she told Vanity Fair. "I needed a life." For Al Pacino, that independence had been part of her magic, and perhaps part of what scared him away. Now, in hindsight, it was also what made her unforgettable. "She never asked me to change," he told a friend quietly. "She just asked me to show up." Weeks after the memorial, Pacino visited her Brentwood home. Dexter met him at the gate. Inside, everything was just as she'd left it. Her photography books stacked on the table, her straw hat hanging on the wall, the scent of jasmine from the garden she tended. He spent nearly an hour there in silence, tracing his fingers over framed photographs. The Godfather set, the AFI ceremony, a candid shot of them laughing mid-conversation. Before leaving, he placed a folded note on her desk. No one knows what it said. But Dexter later admitted that when she found it, the final line made her cry. It read, "You were the best part of the story." For a man whose career was built on grand speeches, it was the simplest sentence he'd ever written, and the truest. In the weeks since her passing, the world has begun to measure the void she left. Yet, everywhere there is evidence that she's still here. In laughter replayed on old film reels, in young actresses who quote her lines, in Al Pacino's softened voice whenever he mentions her name. She had once said that art should celebrate the absurdity of being alive. Even in death, she succeeded. Al Pacino's confession, his late declaration of love, wasn't just about regret. It was a reminder that some connections defy time, that even unspoken words can echo forever. In the end, Diane Keaton's greatest role may have been as a mirror, reflecting the vulnerability of everyone who loved her. She could fly, and maybe that's what she's doing now. Soaring above the city she made her stage, her laughter mingling with the wind, her legacy impossible to contain.